Hey YouTube, Chris with RC Worst here. Welcome back to another great video. Today we're going to be showing you 6 tips that every sump pump owner should know. So let's get started. Okay, so here we are with tip number 1. This one's pretty easy. You'll need your 5-gallon bucket, and all you do, take the cover off of your sump with everything plugged up and energized, ready for action on any other given day, and we'll just start dumping water in here until it activates the pump. What we're trying to do is confirm that the pump is working. The more critical the application that you have, or the more likely that you could have a flood, then the more often you're probably going to want to perform this check. So we're going to fill this up and make it work. Alright, so here we are with tip number 2. You saw tip number 1, cycling the pump. Tip number 2 is on a regular basis, and you're going to learn as you go how often you need to do this, but clean the interior of your sump out. Sumps that don't run as frequently are more prone usually to getting a lot of sediment and stuff, and as you can see, this sump doesn't have the best lid, so things can easily get kicked into there. So it's extremely important to clear stuff out. We grabbed this little piece of dryer lint here, and that's definitely something that's going to stop your pump up. If you don't really feel like digging around in there a lot, you can use something like a shop vac, like a wet vac. Those work really well in these situations. And in this particular instance, the sump pump is actually on a gravel bed, so underneath the pump is a bunch of gravel. Because the sump doesn't operate very frequently, most of the water that gets introduced just saturates into the ground. It's only in real bad situations that the sump pump actually engages in this particular instance. So that's why it's, again, critical to clean this out and make sure the pump is working for when those heavy rains and things come. Then you're not sitting there with a flooded basement. So on to tip number 3. Okay, so tip number 3, here we are. And we don't really have a lot to show you, but if you are interested in what we're about to talk about, we did make a video about this particular subject, and we'll put that in the description below. So what is that subject? Well, now that I've left you hanging long enough, we're talking about battery backup systems. So in the event that you've got a sump pump that runs pretty regularly, or in the event that you don't necessarily want to worry about the system, in the long term, they make battery backup systems where you would have a secondary pump down in your sump basin that operates off of a battery. In the instance of a power outage, that battery backup pump is going to run off of the battery when the primary pump doesn't have electricity. Or in the situation where your primary pump is not keeping up with the inflow and it does have power, this backup pump can lend a little bit of additional volume. So there's multiple reasons to have a battery backup system, and I think that it's a great investment in the long term because it can definitely save you some money. And you know, saving your basement is definitely a priority for most people. So here we go with tip number 4. Okay, so tip number 4, this one's pretty straightforward. Sump pumps, like any other mechanical thing with moving parts, do wear out from time to time. Now, sump pumps are kind of unique in a way that when they fail, usually there's not a whole lot of time between the failure and when things start to go bad. So being proactive, knowing what pump you have and how available that pump is, those are things to keep in mind when it comes to owning a sump pump, primarily because you want to make sure that you're not finding yourself in a bit of a pickle in the event that something goes wrong. So tying all these tips together, this is just one more tip where we wanted to emphasize the importance of knowing what equipment you've got and whether or not it's working, so that you can be proactive and keep things from flooding, essentially. So on to tip number 5. On to tip number 5. So here we are, tip number 5. We're well on our way and only one away from the final and fantastic tip. So what we've got for tip number 5, this kind of relates to tip number 4 a little bit, but it's a little bit different at the same time. So be proactive, again, with the ownership of your system, knowing the workings of the system, how it operates, what each individual component is. These are all things that are going to be things that help you to save money in the long run, because the more you know about your system, the more you're going to be able to troubleshoot and determine on your own, and thus allowing you to save money and also preventing you from being taken advantage of by professionals. One additional thing that I would recommend that everyone do when you have a sump pump system is take all of your ownership documents and receipts and everything that's related to the sump pump purchase and installation, and put that in a Ziploc baggie and hang that on the wall next to where your sump is, so that you've always got easy access. You always know when and where and what with relation to the equipment that you've got installed. So keep that in mind, and now we're on to the exciting tip number 6. Okay, here we are, tip number 6. Now, if you recognize what this is, then you're not in for much of a surprise. But if you don't recognize what this is, then aren't you glad that you stuck around through tip number 6? So here we are with an alarm system. What this does is it actually mounts to the wall, and it can be mounted close to your sump, or it can be mounted a little farther away, depending on where you are in your home in relation to where the sump is. So these have a very loud, audible alarm that will notify you when the sump has failed. Now, this particular unit, this is the original let's see, Tank Alert 1 series. Now, this one doesn't actually have a battery backup, but they do have plenty of options with a battery backup. So if you're in a situation where you want to protect yourself, or know in the instance, for example, that you don't have a battery backup sump pump, you would definitely want to invest in the battery backup alarm, because if that sump becomes full and starts overflowing, at least then you have an opportunity to do something about it. Whereas this standard alarm just operates off a 120 volt. If it doesn't have power, it's not going to work. But the idea is that when the sump pump isn't turning on, you've got a secondary float that when it raises, it's going to sound the alarm. Just like that. That's I think this is a 92 decibel alarm that's in this thing, so very loud, and chances are you'd be able to hear it anywhere within your house relatively easily. And another thing that you can do once you have one of these systems, or if you already have one of these systems, is regularly test it with the test button to determine if the buzzer is still working properly, just to assure yourself that you're going to know when that alarm does go off. So that's tip number 6. Get a battery backup alarm system, or a standard alarm system. I would say a standard alarm system is going to be more than sufficient if you have a battery backup system in your home for your sump. If you don't, then I would highly recommend going with the battery backup alarm, so that you always know what's going on with your system. So thanks for joining us today. Have a great day. We hope that you enjoyed this video, and be sure to like and subscribe if you did. If you have any questions, leave those in the comments below. If you have any specific questions on equipment, or need any of this kind of stuff, give us a call at RC Worst, or visit us online at rcworst.com. Have a great day.